Welcome to Arizona Barrio Stories. Thank you for being a part of this platform. We love you. Thank you for being a part of this magnificent, unique site. Before we get started today, we have a quick message from attorney Francisco Gutierrez.
This segment brought to you by Gutierrez Law Firm.
Hola, mi gente. I'm attorney Francisco Gutierrez and a proud sponsor of Arizona Barrio Stories. I grew up in the Anat Barrio, and I've been practicing law now since 1984. Experience really does matter. If you've been injured by someone, call me. Let's talk.
Welcome back. Like I said, thank you for being a part of this platform. It is unique. We don't care if you're from Douglas or Dudleyville, but thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for your submissions of stories and pictures. We love them. You know, if you know me, I love history. Today's guest is going to bring us some history of the Valley. You're going to be captivated by his story and his journey. Welcome. Introduce yourself.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is IzaaK Ruiz.
IzaaK, tell me, where did you grow up?
I grew up down in South Phoenix, just off of Central and Rozier.
I know that area very well. Tell me, what grammar schools did you go to? What were you like as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to NFL Academy as a kid. You know, I was always that kid that wanted to get into everything. So I was very curious, loved learning, and sometimes I was a little bit more mischievous than I should have been.
I think the word is travieso. Okay, you're at NFL, you're in grade school, you're getting ready for high school. Were you involved in any sports or outside activities to keep you grounded?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took part in the SBOS, so that's our Student Board of Service, Student Government. Was a part of the mock trial team. I was a part of basketball, football. You know, funny enough, we had a playoff game one time in basketball, and so I had to go to that, and I wasn't able to go to a state tournament for the mock trial team. And I was the cross-examiner, so big position. I felt bad, but I was just always involved in everything, and so sometimes you would get those problems, if you will, but good problems.
In high school, you started thinking of, when I grow up, I want to be a... What were you thinking during that time period when you grew up?
Absolutely. So originally, I was looking at Embry-Riddle University because I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. And so I talked a lot with my math professor, Mr. Duarte, and didn't get around to that, but I did choose something, you know, STEM related, and I went into economics.
And after high school, where did your journey take you as far as university or college?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into the Catholic University of America, but the story around that is crazy. I was a part of that last wave of students applying. I hadn't heard anything back for a while, and there was this priest, Father Tom Forrest. We went to go visit him, very, very famous priest, big activist, and you know, he gave me a blessing, and he said, "You'll be fine." He gave me a little smack on the face, and then within 24 hours, I received an acceptance letter. I mean, it was the craziest thing.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Part of the reason we have you here, and you and I had talked off camera, the last name Ruiz. When people hear the last name Ruiz, they might equate it with people of South Phoenix. Are you related to anybody from South Phoenix with the last name Ruiz?
Yeah, maybe like 100 or so.
Tell me, who's your dad? Tell me about your family.
Absolutely. So my dad's Armando Ruiz, my mom was Peggy Ruiz, but the family history goes back, I mean, a long time ago, generations, and it starts in Chihuahua, Mexico. And so essentially, the Ruiz story can be looked at in 4 chapters. Chapter 1 is Go North. Chapter 2 is From Rural to Urban. Chapter 3 is A Shared Power. And then Chapter 4 is No Longer the Minority, Governing. And so Chapter 1 takes us back to Chihuahua. And so my grandma's side, they were copper miners, gold miners. They could, whatever they could mine, they would mine. And so that starts down in Parral, Mexico, where the famous Pancho Villa is from. And so they had worked up through El Paso, the pass, like hundreds of thousands of other Mexicans. And that's where they decided to go west. You know, they were miners, they followed the railroads. And then on my grandpa's side, so my grandpa Reyes, they were agriculture workers. And so for them, they started down in the Paquime, it's the old name for it. It became Casas Grandes. It was the last major town before the Spanish got there. And yeah, they went north, followed the Mimbres River, and they were agriculture workers. So they followed the rivers, they worked the fields. And eventually, my grandma's side, my grandpa, they meet in Lordsburg. So on my grandma's side, they were working at the Shakespeare mine, and my grandpa was working the fields there. So they meet each other, they get married, and that's where they decide to move to the big city, to Phoenix. And so this was what takes us from rural to urban. And so here in Phoenix, there was only one place really where you could live because of deed restrictions everywhere else, and that was here in Central City. And so my grandpa, my dad, my grandma, a few other siblings, they moved here to Central City, and they moved down to 3rd Street in Mojave. So that's right next to the old Phoenix Municipal Stadium. It's where Barry Bonds, the Giants, used to play. So my dad and them, they all grew up huge baseball fans like everyone else in that neighborhood. And, you know, they were there. There were thousands of Latino families, and it was really a thriving area. I mean, you talk about a golden era. And so, you know, around there, you had the African-American communities. You had East Lake to the north, just west there of 7th Ave, and then south of that around the Broadway. And so that's a little bit more of, you know, South Phoenix, where I'm from. And from there, my grandpa and my grandma, they decide to move away from their cousins, the Bejeranos, and they move into South Phoenix. And so this is chapter 3 of the story. And it's, you know, shared power, can't we all get along? And so when they move into 15th Ave in Southern, that neighborhood, you know, they're surrounded by a bunch of white people. They're great friends with them. They were all cowboys, cowgirls. But at the time in South Phoenix, you had essentially a third of each group of whites, blacks, and Latinos. And so between the 3 groups, it was the question of how do we share power? And I mean, it was just an amazing time. A lot of things were going on. So that's where you get the riots down in South. You know, at the time they were the rebels, and this is going on at the same time as Black Power, Chicano Power. And so it was really just this melting pot of social issues, of peoples, of cultures, of languages. And so that's what my, you know, essentially my grandparents and my dad and my uncles and aunts moved into. And, you know, on the board, the Roosevelt School Board, you had, it was pretty much split up evenly, and you had 2 African Americans and Reverend Brooks, and then you get 2 Latinos, and that's my tia Leticia, and that's Carlos Avalar, and then you get a white lady, which is Leslie Hatfield. And
yes,
so
they were all on the board when I was there.
Oh, okay, awesome. So yeah, that was, you know, that split. And so it shows you just the diversity there in the cultures, in the peoples. And then, you know, at that time, it's how do we get along? How do we move forward? And, you know, 2 things really changed the whole dynamic down there. And that was the amnesty bill signed by President Reagan, and then the expansion of the freeways and the airports. And so that's when, I mean, the Latino population, it really turns into the Latino diaspora. People start moving into Maryville, people start moving into South Phoenix, and now you have immigrants, undocumented immigrants before, who couldn't have really the privileges that they enjoy today, where they would be able to buy land. People were now becoming citizens, growing families down in South Phoenix, and so the Latino population boomed. And so that's where we go into chapter 4, and it's no longer the minority we're governing. And so around the Maryville, South Phoenix area, you see all of these positions. Now Latinos are in the government positions leading. And so essentially that's what the story has become today, where we have a majority Latinos in South Phoenix. You still have the other groups there. You get the historic area of Broadway, just from about 16th Street East. That's where you have the African American community that's been there for decades, that my family has known, we've worked with. And, you know, we really love, we have a great relationship. And then also with, you know, you get the whites down just around the area. And so it's still that melting pot where it's the beautiful African-American communities, the white communities, the Latinos. Now we have a lot more groups moving in. And so culturally, it's becoming even more diverse than it was, you know, 40 years ago.
Now, you mentioned to me also off camera when we first met, you were teaching at NFL Academy yourself, correct?
Absolutely.
And what are the things that you were teaching your students about empowerment?
Yeah, so, funny enough and really beautifully, I taught there, and I taught the same class that my mom taught me. And it was the last class she had ever taught before she passed. And so I got to teach leadership, and one of the things we talked about a lot was the function of power. And so this is something my dad had talked about when he talked about the Morenci strikers back during the Phelps-Dodge strike and Cesar Chavez's of the world, and looking at how does power work, and how could you now start to have a say in that. And so we talked about the highway expansions here, the airport expansions, and just how did that change the dynamics of power within different neighborhoods. And so essentially in the class, that's what we had talked about. We used real world examples. And so with them, it was just reminding them that you have a voice, you have a brain, both are beautiful, and so learn how to use them. And so for them, it was looking at how do we use power, what is power, what mediums does it travel through. And so we talked a lot about music, about art, about just poem, books, huge part of how power works. And so that is a lot of what we talked about what do they see, what is the message trying to be told to them, who's telling the message, and where is their voice and what is their message.
Before we close out our show today, tell me about this wonderful picture that you brought.
Absolutely. So this is from 1985. And this goes back to the time I talked about earlier where South Phoenix was really a melting pot, split up in thirds. And so what you see here is you see Reese's and folks from different backgrounds of the community. And so it just shows you what diversity was there. These are the leaders of the community, and there are many more who are not here. But it really is just a testament to what the community was like. The painting behind there, so there was actually a gentleman who was writing a racial slur onto the wall. And my dad, he had come over and he said, hey, let's make a deal. Let me put this mural up. I'll pay for everything, the artist, the paint. And so that's where you get this. The amazing David Martinez comes in, paints this, and it really becomes, an iconic painting and mural down in South Phoenix. And so that's
where is this located?
The mural is no longer there, but this was just off of Central. So
chapter 5 is yet to be written, but it sounds like chapter 5 is up and coming. What do you want people to remember you by as we close out?
As someone who's respectful, as a man of faith, and as someone who always chooses justice over anything else.
The question I always ask people when we close out, when you think or hear the word barrio, what comes to mind?
Family.
You come from an amazing family. Thank you for being a part of our show today, and maybe chapter 5, once it's complete, you can come back and talk to us.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank
Irma.
you. Well, I love history, and he gave us quite a bit of history of South Phoenix. Your history might not be in the history books, but your history is important too. Your history is our history. Don't let anybody tell your story. Your story is waiting for you to tell it. Thank you from Arizona Barrio Stories and Latino USA TV. Until next time, we will see you soon.